FSQ Tallahassee. Coming up next, the NPR Playhouse will present the third part of The Hound of the Baskervilles, the case of Sherlock Holmes, followed by the second part of Red Badge of Courage.
National Public Radio, in association with Independent Radio Drama Productions, presents one of the cases of Sherlock Holmes, with Edward Petherbridge as Sherlock Holmes and David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson. This is Episode 3 of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Dr. James Mortimer has come calling to Baker Street with an ancient story and a modern problem. The story has to do with the curse that hangs over the Baskerville family of Dartmoor. Its origins date back to the period of English history known as the Great Rebellion. Baskerville Hall was then occupied by Sir Hugo Baskerville, an evil, violent man. One terrible night, he kidnapped a young farm girl and brought her to the hall. But before he could have his way with her, the young woman escaped. Sir Hugo and his drunken friends pursued her across the moor, unleashing a pack of hounds to run her to ground. In the wild chase over the desolate landscape, Sir Hugo outdistanced his companions. Suddenly, Sir Hugo's hounds came tumbling back in fright. The men moved on slowly and found the girl dead from exhaustion and fear. Nearby was Sir Hugo. Over him, its jaws sunk deep into his throat, was a foul thing, a great black beast shaped like a hound. This was the curse of the Baskervilles. Although he is a man of science, Dr. Mortimer half believes that it was this curse that has killed the most recent occupant of the hall, Sir Charles Baskerville. He proceeds to tell Holmes and Watson the details regarding Sir Charles's death. Dr. Mortimer believed that Sir Charles feared something on the moor, a fear that was affecting his already weak heart. So great was his anxiety that he had planned to move to London, but on the night of his death, he had gone to the edge of the moor as if to meet someone.
Sir Charles had evidently stood there for 5 or 10 minutes.
How do you know that?
Because the ash had twice dropped from his cigar.
Excellent. This is a colleague, Watson, after our own heart.
Indeed.
Something Sir Charles saw on the moor sent him running in terror, so hard that his heart burst and killed him. Baskerville's manservant, Barrymore, found the body and testified at the inquest that there were no traces of any kind on the ground near it. But when Dr. Mortimer arrived on the scene, he did a bit of his own detecting.
One false statement was made by Barrymore at the inquest. He said that there were no traces upon the ground round the body. He did not observe any. But I did. Some little distance off, but fresh and clear.
The footprints?
Footprints.
A man's or a woman's?
Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound.
Dr. Mortimer has not come to ask Sherlock Holmes to investigate the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. His problem is the heir to the manor, Sir Henry Baskerville, a distant relative who had been living in Canada. Sir Henry is determined to take over the responsibilities of Baskerville Hall, but Dr. Mortimer fears the evil fate that hangs over the family, and so has come to Sherlock Holmes for advice. Holmes decides it would be best for him to meet Sir Henry Baskerville, and an appointment is made for the next day. Sir Henry arrives, a small, alert, dark-eyed man, about 30 years of age, very sturdily built, with thick black eyebrows and a strong, pugnacious face. He doesn't know whether to be amused or concerned by a letter that has just been delivered to him at the hotel. Consisting almost entirely of words clipped from a newspaper, the message reads, "As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moor." Sherlock Holmes, having determined that the words in the message had been cut from the previous day's London Times, is examining the letter paper when he says aloud, "What's this?" That's how Episode 2 ended. Here's Episode 3 of The Hound of the Baskervilles. Edward Petherbridge is Sherlock Holmes.
Well?
Nothing. It is a blank half sheet of paper without even a watermark on it. I think we have drawn as much as we can from this curious letter. And now, Sir Henry, has anything else of interest happened to you since you have been in London?
Why, no, Mr. Holmes, I think not.
You have not observed anyone follow or watch you?
I seem to have walked right into the thick of a dime novel. Why in thunder should anyone follow or watch me?
We are coming to that. You have nothing else to report to us before we go into this matter?
Well, it depends upon what you think worth reporting.
I think anything out of the ordinary routine of life well worth reporting.
I don't know much of British life yet, for I have spent nearly all my time in the States and in Canada. But I hope that to lose one of your boots is not part of the ordinary routine of life over here.
You have lost one of your boots.
Well, my dear sir, it's only mislaid. You'll find it when you return to the hotel. What's the use of troubling Mr. Holmes with trifles of this kind?
Well, he asked me for anything outside the ordinary routine.
Exactly. However foolish the incident may seem. You have lost one of your boots, you say.
Well, mislaid it, anyhow. I put them both outside my door last night, and there was only one in the morning. I could get no sense out of the chap who cleans them. The worst of it is that I only bought the pair last night in the Strand, and I have never had them on.
If you have never worn them, why did you put them out to be cleaned?
They were tan boots and had never been varnished. That was why I put them on.
Then I understand that on your arrival in London yesterday, you went out at once and bought a pair of boots.
I did a good deal of shopping. Dr. Mortimer here went around with me. You see, if I'm to be squire down there, I must dress the part. And it may be that I have become a little careless in my ways out west. Among other things, I bought these brown boots, gave $6 for them, and had one stolen before ever I had them on my feet.
It seems a singularly useless thing to steal. I confess that I share Dr. Mortimer's belief that it will not be long before the missing boot is found.
And now, gentlemen, it seems to me that I have spoken quite enough about the little that I know. It is time that you kept your promise and gave me a full account of what we are all driving at.
Your request is a very reasonable one. Dr. Mortimer, I think you could do no better than tell your story as you told it to us.
Well, it began with one of your ancestors. He was called Hugo, and perhaps you remember seeing his portrait at Baskerville Hall. The vicious monster hound lives on in the minds of people.
Well, I seem to have come into an inheritance with a vengeance. Of course, I've heard of the Hound ever since I was in the nursery. It's the pet story of the family, though I never thought of taking it seriously before. And as to my uncle's death, well, it all seems boiling up in my head, and I can't get it clear yet. You don't seem quite to have made up your mind whether it's a case for a policeman or a clergyman.
Precisely.
And now there's this affair of the letter to me at the hotel. I suppose that fits into its place.
It seems to me that someone knows more than we do about what goes on upon the moor.
And also that someone is not ill-disposed towards you, since they warn you of the danger.
Or it may be that they wish for their own purposes to scare me away.
Well, of course, that is possible also. I'm very much indebted to you, Dr. Mortimer, for introducing me to a problem which presents several interesting alternatives. But the practical point which we now have to decide, Sir Henry, is whether it is or is not advisable for you to go to Baskerville Hall.
Why should I not go?
There seems to be danger.
Do you mean danger from this family fiend? Or do you mean danger from human beings?
Well, that is what we have to find out.
Whichever it is, my friend, my answer is fixed. There is no devil in hell, Mr. Holmes, and there is no man on earth who can prevent me from going to the home of my own people. And you can take that to be my final answer. Meanwhile, I have hardly had time to think over all that you have told me. It's a big thing for a man to have to understand and to decide at one sitting. I should like to have a quiet hour by myself to make up my mind. Now, look here, Mr. Holmes, it's 11:30 now, and I'm going back right away to my hotel. Suppose you and your friend, Dr. Watson, come around and lunch with us at 2. I'll be able to tell you more clearly then how this thing strikes me.
Is that convenient to you, Watson?
Perfectly.
Then you may expect us. Shall I have a cab called?
I'd prefer to walk, for this affair has flurried me rather.
I'll join you in a walk with pleasure.
Then we meet again at 2 o'clock. Au revoir and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Your hat and boots. Watson, quick!
What?
Not a moment to lose.
Shall I run on and stop them?
Not for the world, my dear Watson. I'm perfectly satisfied with your company, if you will tolerate mine. Our friends are quite wise, for it's certainly a very fine morning for a walk.
At that instant, I was aware of a bushy black beard and a pair of piercing eyes turned upon us through the side window of the cab. Instantly, the trapdoor at the top flew up, something was screamed to the driver, and the cab flew madly off down Regent Street. Holmes looked eagerly round for another, but no empty one was in sight. Then he dashed in wild pursuit amid the stream of the traffic. But the start was too great, and already the cab was out of sight.
There's our man, Watson. Come along. We'll have a good look at him, if nothing else. There was ever such bad luck and such bad management, too. Watson, if you are an honest man, you will record this also and set it against my successes.
Who was the man?
I have no idea.
A spy?
Well, it was evident from what we have heard that Baskerville has been very closely shadowed by someone since he has been in town. How else could it be known so quickly that it was the Northumberland Hotel which he had chosen? And if they had followed him the first day, I argued that they would follow him also the second. You may have observed that I twice strolled over to the window while Dr. Mortimer was reading his legend.
Yes, I remember.
I was looking out for loiterers in the street, but I saw none. We are dealing with a clever man, Watson. This matter cuts very deep. And though I have not finally made up my mind whether it is a benevolent or a malevolent agency which is in touch with us, I am conscious always of power and design. When our friends left, I at once followed them in the hope of marking down their invisible attendant. So wily was he that he had not trusted himself upon foot, but he had availed himself of a cab so that he could loiter behind or dash past them and so escape their notice. His method had the additional advantage that if they were to take a cab, he was all ready to follow them. It has, however, one obvious disadvantage.
It puts him in the power of the cabbie.
Exactly.
Oh, what a pity we did not get the number.
My dear Watson, clumsy as I have been, you surely do not seriously imagine that I neglected to get the number.
Oh.
2704 is our man. But that is no use to us for the moment.
I fail to see how you could have done more.
On observing the cab, I should have instantly turned and walked in the other direction. I should then at my leisure have hired a second cab and followed the first at a respectful distance, or better still, have driven to the Northumberland Hotel and waited there. When our unknown had followed Baskerville home, we should have had then the opportunity of playing his own game upon himself and seeing where he made for. As it is, by an indiscreet eagerness which was taken advantage of with extraordinary quickness and energy by our opponent, we have betrayed ourselves and lost our man. There is no object in our following Dr. Mortimer and Sir Henry now. The shadow has departed and will not return. We must see what further cards we have in our hands and play them with decision. Could you swear to that man's face within the cab?
I could only swear to the beard.
And so could I, from which I gather that in all probability it was the false one. A clever man upon so delicate an errand has no use for a beard save to conceal his features. Come in here, Watson.
Oh, Mr. Holmes.
Wilson, I see you have not forgotten the little case in which I had the good fortune to help you.
No, sir, indeed I have not. You saved my good name and perhaps my life.
My dear fellow, you exaggerate. I have some recollection, Wilson, that you had among your boys a lad named Cartwright, who showed some ability during the investigation.
Yes, sir, he's still with us.
Could you ring for him? Thank you. And I should be glad to have change of this £5 note.
Certainly, sir.
Ah, young Cartwright. So pleased to meet you again.
Mr. Holmes?
Let me have that hotel directory. Thank you. Now, Cartwright, there are the names of 23 hotels here, all in the immediate neighborhood of Charing Cross. Do you see?
Yes, sir.
You will visit each of these in turn.
Yes, sir.
You will begin in each by giving the outside porter 1 shilling. Here are the 23 shillings.
Yes, sir.
You will tell him that you want to see the waste paper of yesterday. You will say that an important telegram has miscarried and that you are looking for it. You understand?
Yes, sir.
But what you are really looking for is the center page of the Times with some holes cut in it with scissors. Here is a copy of the Times. It is this page. You could easily recognize it again, could you not?
Yes, sir.
In each case, the outside porter will send for the hall porter, to whom you will also give 1 shilling. Here are 23 more shillings. You will then learn in possibly 20 cases out of the 23 that the waste of the day before has been burned or removed. In 3 other cases, you will be shown a heap of paper, and you will look for this page of the Times among it. The odds are enormously against you finding it. Now, There are 10 shillings over, in case of emergencies. Let me have a report by wire at Baker Street before evening.
Yes, Mr. Holmes?
Mm-hmm. And now, Watson, it only remains for us to find out by wire the identity of the cabman, number 2704, and then we will drop into one of the Bond Street picture galleries and fill in the time until we are due at the hotel.
Sherlock Holmes had, in a very remarkable degree, the power of detaching his mind at will. For 2 hours, the strange business in which we had been involved appeared to be forgotten, and he was entirely absorbed in the pictures of the modern Belgian masters. He would talk of nothing but art, of which he had the crudest ideas, from our leaving the gallery until we found ourselves at the Northumberland Hotel.
Ah, Mr. Holmes. Sir Henry Baskerville is upstairs expecting you. He asked me to show you up at once when you came.
Mm-hmm. Have you any objection to my looking at your register?
Not in the least.
This Theophilus Johnson and family from Newcastle. Surely that must be the same Johnson whom I used to know. A lawyer, is he not? Grey-headed and walks with a limp.
No, sir. This is Mr. Johnson, the coal owner. A very active gentleman, not older than yourself.
Surely you are mistaken about his trade.
No, sir. He's used this hotel for many years, and he's very well known to us.
That settles it. Mrs. Oldmore, too. I seem to remember the name. Excuse my curiosity, but often in calling upon one friend, one finds another.
She is an invalid lady, sir. Her husband was once Mayor of Gloucester. She always comes to us when she's in town.
Thank you. I'm afraid I cannot claim her acquaintance. You have been most helpful. We have established a most important fact by these questions, Watson. We know that these people who are so interested in our friend have not settled down in his own hotel. That means that while they are, as we have seen, very anxious to watch him, they are equally anxious that he should not see them. Now, this is a most suggestive fact.
What does it suggest?
It suggests. Hello. My dear fellow, what on earth is the matter?
Seems to me they're playing me for a sucker in this hotel. They'll find they've started in to monkey with the wrong man, unless they're careful. By thunder, if that chap can't find my missing boot, there will be trouble. I can take a joke with the best, Mr. Holmes, but they've gone a bit over the mark this time.
Still looking for a boot?
Yes, sir, and mean to find it.
But surely you said that it was a new brown boot.
So it was, sir, and now it's an old black one.
What you don't mean to say?
That's just what I do mean to say. I only had 3 pairs in the world. The new brown, the old black, and the patent leathers, which I am wearing. Last night they took one of my brown ones, and today they have sneaked one of the black. There's a fellow who said he'd find it. Well, have you got it? Speak out, man, and don't stand staring.
No, sir. I have made inquiry all over the hotel, but I can hear no word of it.
Well, either that boot comes back before sundown, or I'll see the manager and tell him that I go right straight out of this hotel.
It shall be found, sir. I promise you that if you will have a little patience, it will be found.
Mind it is, for it's the last thing of mine that I'll lose in this den of thieves. Well, Mr. Holmes, you'll excuse my troubling you about such a trifle.
I think it's well worth troubling about.
Why, you look very serious over it.
How do you explain it?
I just don't attempt to explain it. It seems the very maddest, queerest thing that ever happened to me.
The queerest, perhaps.
What do you make of it yourself?
Well, I don't profess to understand it yet. This case of yours is very complex. Sir Henry, when it is taken in conjunction with your uncle's death, I'm not sure that of all the 500 cases of capital importance which I have handled, there is one which cuts so deep. But we hold several threads in our hands, and the odds are that one or other of them will guide us to the truth. We may waste time in following the wrong one, but sooner or later, we must come upon the right.
We had a pleasant luncheon in which little was said of the business which had brought us together. We then repaired to a private sitting room.
What are your immediate intentions, Sir Henry?
To go to Baskerville Hall.
And when?
At the end of the week.
On the whole, I think that your decision is a wise one. I have ample evidence that you are being dogged in London, and amid the millions of this great city, it is difficult to discover who these people are, or what that object can be. If their intentions are evil, they might do you a mischief, and we should be powerless to prevent it. You did know, Dr. Mortimer, that you were followed this morning from my house.
Followed? By whom?
That, unfortunately, is what I cannot tell you. Have you among your neighbors or acquaintance on Dartmoor any man with a full black beard?
No. Oh, let me see. Why, yes.
Barrymore, Sir Charles's butler, is a man with a full black beard.
Ah. Where is Barrymore?
Well, he's in charge of the hall.
We had best ascertain if he really is there, or if by any possibility he might be in London.
Well, how can you do that?
There are telegraph forms on the desk beside you, Watson. I will dictate.
Yes.
Is already for Sir Henry. That will do. Addressed to Mr. Barrymore, Baskerville Hall. Which is the nearest telegraph office?
Grimpen.
Very good. We will send a second wire to the postmaster. Grimpen. Telegram to Mr. Barrymore to be delivered into his own hand. If absent, please return wire to Sir Henry Baskerville, Northumberland Hotel. That should let us know before evening whether Barrymore is at his post in Devonshire or not.
That's so. And by the way, Dr. Mortimer, who is this Barrymore, anyhow?
He's the son of the old caretaker, who's dead. They've looked after the hall for 4 generations now. Well, so far as I know, he and his wife are as respectable a couple as any in the county.
At the same time, it's clear enough that so long as there are none of the family at the hall, these people have a mighty fine home and nothing to do.
That's true.
Did Barrymore profit at all by Sir Charles's will?
Well, yes, he and his wife had £500 each.
Did they know that they would receive this?
Oh, yes, Sir Charles was very fond of talking about the provisions of his will.
That is very interesting.
Well, I hope you don't look with suspicious eyes upon everyone who received a legacy from Sir Charles, for I also had £1,000 left to me.
Indeed. And anyone else?
Well, there were many insignificant sums to individuals and a large number of public charities. The residue all went to Sir Henry.
And how much was the residue?
£740,000.
I had no idea that so gigantic a sum was involved.
Well, Sir Charles had the reputation of being rich, but we didn't know how very rich he was until we came to examine his securities. The total value of the estate was close on to £1 million.
Dear me, it is a stake for which a man might well play a desperate game. And one more question, Dr. Mortimer. Supposing that anything should happen to our young friend here, you will forgive the unpleasant hypothesis, who would inherit the estate?
Since Roger Baskerville, Sir Charles's younger brother, died unmarried, the estate would descend to the Desmonds, who are distant cousins. James Desmond is an elderly clergyman in Westmoreland.
Thank you. These details are of great interest. Have you met Mr. James Desmond?
Yes, he once came down to visit Sir Charles. He's a man of venerable appearance and of saintly life. I remember that he refused to accept any settlement from Sir Charles, though he pressed it upon him.
And this man of simple tastes would be the heir to Sir Charles's thousands?
He would be the heir to the estate, because that is entailed. He would also be the heir to the money, unless it were willed otherwise by the present owner, who can, of course, do what he likes with it.
Have you made your will, Sir Henry?
No, Mr. Holmes, I have not. I have not had time, for it was only yesterday that I learned how matters stood. But in any case, I feel that the money should go with the title and estate. That was my poor uncle's idea. How is the owner going to restore the glories of the Baskervilles if he has not enough money to keep up the property? House, land, and dollars must go together.
Quite so. Well, Sir Henry, I'm of one mind with you as to the advisability of your going down to Devonshire without delay. There is only one provision which I must make. You certainly must not go alone.
Dr. Mortimer returns with me.
But Dr. Mortimer has his practice to attend to, and his house is miles away from yours. With all the goodwill in the world, he may be unable to help you. No, Sir Henry, you must take with you someone, a trusty man, who will be always by your side.
Is it possible that you could come yourself, Mr. Holmes?
If matters came to a crisis, I should endeavor to be present in person. But you can understand that with my extensive consulting practice and with the constant appeals which reach me from many quarters, it is impossible for me to be absent from London for any indefinite time. At the present instant, one of the most revered names in England is being besmirched by a blackmailer, and only I can stop a disastrous scandal. You will see how impossible it is for me to go to Dartmoor.
Whom would you recommend her?
If my friend Watson would undertake it, there is no man who is better worth having at your side when you are in a tight space. No one can say so more confidently than I.
Well, now that is real kind of you, Dr. Watson. You see how it is with me, and you know just as much about the matter as I do. If you will come down to Baskerville Hall and see me through, I'll never forget it.
I will come with pleasure. I do not know how I could employ my time better.
And you will report very carefully to me. When a crisis comes, as it will do, I will direct how you shall act. I suppose that by Saturday, All might be ready.
Well, that suit Dr. Watson?
Perfectly.
Then, on Saturday, unless we hear to the contrary, we shall meet at the 10:30 train from Paddington.
My missing boot! It's under this cabinet.
May all your difficulties vanish as easily.
But it's a very singular thing. I searched this room carefully before lunch.
And so did I. Every inch of it.
Well, there was certainly no boot in it then.
In that case, the waiter must have placed it there while we were lunching.
The French waiter was sent for, but professed to know nothing of the matter, nor could any inquiry clear it up. Another item had been added to that constant and apparently purposeless series of small mysteries which had succeeded each other so rapidly. Setting aside the whole grim story of Sir Charles's death, we had a line of inexplicable incidents all within the limits of 2 days, which included the receipt of the printed letter, the black-bearded spy in the hansom, the loss of the new brown boot, the loss of the old black boot, and now the return of the new brown boot. Holmes sat in silence in the cab as we drove back to Baker Street, and I knew from his drawn brows and keen face that his mind, like my own, was busy in endeavouring to frame some scheme into which all these strange and apparently disconnected episodes could be lifted. All afternoon and late into the evening he sat lost in tobacco and thought.
Telegrams for Mr. Holmes, sir.
Thank you. Watson. I've just heard that Barrymore is at the Hall, Baskerville. Here's the second. Visited 23 hotels as directed, but sorry to report, unable to trace cut sheet of Times Cartwright. There go 2 of my threads, Watson. There is nothing more stimulating than a case where everything goes against you. We must cast round for another scent.
We've still got the cabman who drove the spy.
Exactly. I have wired to get his name and address from the official registry. I should not be surprised if this were an answer to my question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I've got a message from the head office that a gent at this address had been inquiring for 2704. Well, I've driven my cab these 7 years and never a word of complaint. I came here straight from the yard to ask you to your face what you had against me.
Dr. Watson journeys to Dartmoor on the next episode of Arthur Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles, adapted for radio by Tim Crook and directed by Richard Shannon. Edward Petherbridge was Sherlock Holmes, with David Peart as Dr. John H. Watson. Other members of the cast were Stephen Thorne as Dr. Mortimer and Bill Roberts as Sir Henry Baskerville. Support for this program comes from National Public Radio member stations and NPR, whose contributors include LexisNexis, helping legal, business, and government professionals collect, manage, and use information, and the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund, helping people to make the arts part of their everyday lives. I'm Steve Zakar. This is NPR, National Public Radio.